We live in a culture that praises kindness. From childhood, we are taught that being nice, agreeable, and selfless is the mark of a good person. We admire the person who never complains, who always helps others, who puts everyone else first. Society celebrates these qualities as virtues, and in many ways they are. Kindness can heal relationships, strengthen communities, and bring warmth into a world that often feels cold. But there's another side to this story, one that many people rarely talk about. What happens when kindness becomes a survival strategy rather than an authentic expression of the heart? What happens when being good means constantly ignoring your own needs, suppressing your emotions, and sacrificing your truth for the comfort of others? For many people, the habit of excessive kindness begins early in life. As children, we are deeply dependent on the adults around us. Our survival depends not only on food and shelter, but also on emotional connection. If a child senses that anger, sadness, or disagreement threatens that connection, the child quickly learns something powerful. Certain emotions are not safe. So the child adapts. Instead of expressing anger, the child becomes agreeable. Instead of speaking the truth, the child becomes pleasing. Instead of saying no, the child says yes, even when something feels wrong inside. This adaptation is brilliant. It protects the child. It preserves attachment. It helps the child stay connected to the people they depend on. But what protects us in childhood can quietly harm us in adulthood. Because when emotions are repeatedly suppressed, they do not disappear. The body keeps track of everything the mind tries to ignore. Every unspoken frustration, every swallowed boundary, every moment when you silence yourself to avoid conflict, these experiences accumulate within the nervous system. Over time, the body begins to carry the weight of those suppressed emotions. Stress hormones remain elevated. The immune system becomes strained. The nervous system stays in a constant state of tension. What began as emotional suppression can slowly evolve into chronic stress within the body. And chronic stress is not just a feeling, it is a biological condition. Many people who appear outwardly kind, generous, and endlessly supportive are quietly exhausted inside. They struggle to say no. They feel responsible for everyone else as happiness. They carry the emotional burdens of others while neglecting their own well-being. On the surface, they look strong and caring. But beneath that kindness, there is often something else: self-abandonment. The problem is not kindness itself. Compassion is one of the most beautiful human qualities. The problem arises when kindness toward others replaces kindness toward ourselves. When a person consistently ignores their own feelings in order to maintain harmony, the body begins to send signals. These signals may appear as fatigue, anxiety, chronic pain, or illness. The body is not betraying us, it is communicating. It is asking us to listen. It is asking us to notice the places where we have been silent for too long. Many people believe that being a good person means never upsetting others, never creating conflict, never expressing anger. But anger, when understood properly, is not destructive. Healthy anger is a signal. It tells us when a boundary has been crossed. It tells us when something inside us needs protection. When anger is denied, the boundary disappears. And when boundaries disappear, the self slowly fades. True kindness does not require self-erasure. Genuine compassion does not demand that you silence your truth. In fact, the healthiest relationships are built not on endless accommodation, but on honesty and authenticity. When you begin to recognize these patterns within yourself, it can feel uncomfortable. Many people experience guilt when they first try to set boundaries. They worry about disappointing others. They fear rejection. But awareness is the first step toward healing. Instead of judging yourself for these patterns, approach them with curiosity. Ask yourself, when did I first learn that my needs were less important? When did I begin believing that my value depended on making everyone else happy? These patterns were not chosen consciously. They were learned as adaptations to survive emotionally. And anything that is learned can also be unlearned. Healing does not mean becoming selfish or uncaring. It means expanding your compassion to include yourself. It means recognizing that your emotions, your limits, and your truth deserve the same respect you offer to others. When people begin practicing this kind of self-awareness, something remarkable happens. The nervous system begins to relax. Stress decreases. Relationships become more authentic. And the body often responds with improved health and vitality, because the body thrives when the person inside it is living honestly. Real kindness is not about endless sacrifice. Real kindness includes the courage to speak the truth. It includes the strength to say no when something violates your well-being. It includes the willingness to care for yourself with the same empathy you give to others. You do not have to stop being kind. You simply have to remember that you are one of the people who deserves that kindness too. And when compassion flows in both directions toward others and toward yourself, that is when true healing begins. From a very young age, many people learn that being kind, agreeable, and helpful is the safest way to move through the world. Children quickly discover which behaviors bring approval, love, and acceptance from parents, teachers, and authority figures. When a child smiles, obeys, stays quiet, and meets the emotional needs of others, they are often praised as good. When they show anger, frustration, or disagreement, the reaction they receive may be very different. Sometimes it is subtle disapproval, sometimes it is rejection, and sometimes it is withdrawal of affection. The child does not analyze this consciously, but their nervous system learns an important lesson. Safety and connection come when I suppress parts of myself and become what others want me to be. This adaptation can become deeply ingrained. The child begins to monitor the emotional environment around them. They become highly sensitive to the moods and expectations of others. They anticipate conflict before it happens and adjust their behavior to prevent it. They learn to smooth things over, to make people comfortable, to avoid saying anything that might cause tension. On the surface, these individuals appear caring, generous, and cooperative. They are the ones people often rely on, the ones who rarely complain, the ones who carry responsibilities quietly. Their kindness seems natural, but beneath that kindness there is often an invisible pressure to maintain approval and avoid rejection. As this pattern continues into adulthood, the habit of being too nice slowly becomes a way of life. The person finds it difficult to say no, even when they are overwhelmed or exhausted. They take on tasks they do not have the energy for. They agree to situations that feel wrong inside. They silence their opinions in conversations to avoid disagreement. They offer support to everyone around them, but rarely allow themselves to ask for support in return. Their identity becomes tied to being dependable, accommodating, and emotionally available to others at all times. What often goes unnoticed is the emotional cost of their constant self-suppression. Human beings are not designed to ignore their feelings indefinitely. Emotions such as anger, disappointment, and frustration are not flaws in our character. They are signals that help us understand our needs and boundaries. When those signals are repeatedly ignored, the mind may attempt to bury them, but the body still registers the stress they create. The nervous system becomes conditioned to remain alert, constantly scanning for ways to keep the environment peaceful and avoid upsetting others. This ongoing tension can slowly shape a person's inner world. Instead of asking themselves what they truly want or need, they automatically consider what others expect from them. Decisions are made not from authenticity but from obligation. Relationships can become unbalanced because the person who is always giving rarely reveals their own vulnerabilities. Others may assume they're strong, resilient, or endlessly patient, without realizing that much of that patience comes from the habit of suppressing discomfort. Over time, the gap between the outer personality and the inner experience can grow wider. Outwardly, the person appears calm, helpful, and cooperative. Internally, there may be resentment, exhaustion, and emotional fatigue. Yet expressing these feelings feels risky because it threatens the identity they have built and the approval they have received for so long. Instead of confronting these emotions directly, they are pushed deeper inside. The human body, however, does not simply forget what the mind tries to ignore. The biological systems that regulate stress respond to emotional suppression in powerful ways. When a person consistently ignores their own needs and feelings, the stress response can remain activated for long periods of time. Hormones such as cortisol circulate through the body more frequently. The immune system may become strained, and the nervous system can remain in a subtle but persistent state of tension. Many individuals who are known by others as exceptionally kind or selfless often carry heavy emotional loads that are invisible from the outside. They may feel responsible for the well-being of everyone around them. They may experience guilt when they try to prioritize themselves. Even simple acts of self-care can feel uncomfortable because they contradict the deeply learned belief that their role is to support others first. This belief can make rest, boundaries, and personal expression feel almost like acts of disloyalty. The difficulty with this pattern is that it often goes unrecognized for years, sometimes decades. Because society praises selflessness and kindness, the person receives positive reinforcement for behaviors that may actually be harming them internally. Friends and coworkers may admire their generosity without noticing how often they ignore their own needs. The individual themselves may feel proud of being dependable, while quietly feeling depleted and unseen. Another hidden cost of excessive niceness is the loss of authentic connection. True relationships are built on honesty and mutual understanding. But when someone consistently hides their feelings to keep the peace, others are not seeing the full person. They are interacting with a carefully managed version of that person, one designed to avoid conflict and maintain approval. This can create loneliness even within close relationships, because the individual's True experiences remain unspoken. People who develop this pattern often possess extraordinary empathy, their sensitivity to others. Emotions allows them to provide comfort and support in meaningful ways. Yet that same sensitivity can become overwhelming when it is not balanced with attention to their own internal world. Without boundaries, empathy turns into emotional overextension, where the person absorbs the struggles of others without having a safe space to process their own feelings. The hidden cost of being too nice lies not in kindness itself, but in the quiet disappearance of the self. When a person continually prioritizes harmony over authenticity, their voice becomes softer, their boundaries become weaker, and their needs become less visible even to themselves. The body carries the weight of that silence, the mind adapts to constant accommodation, and the person slowly becomes defined by what they provide for others rather than who they truly are. Human beings enter the world with a natural capacity to feel and express emotions. A child cries when they are uncomfortable, laughs when they feel joy, shows anger when something feels unfair, and seeks comfort when they are afraid. In the early stages of life, these emotional expressions are not calculated or filtered. They arise spontaneously from the child as nervous system. Emotions are simply signals communicating needs, boundaries, and experiences. Yet, as children grow, they begin to learn which emotions are welcomed and which ones are discouraged within the environment around them. A child's greatest need is not independence but connection. Their survival depends on the presence, attention, and care of the adults responsible for them. Because of this deep dependence, children are remarkably sensitive to the emotional climate of their caregivers. They instinctively observe facial expressions, tone of voice, body language, and subtle shifts in mood. Without consciously realizing it, they begin to shape their behavior according to what maintains closeness and what threatens it. If a child expresses sadness and is met with warmth, comfort, and understanding, the child learns that vulnerability is safe. If a child expresses anger or frustration and is met with rejection, criticism, or punishment, a different lesson begins to take root. The child may start to believe that certain feelings are unacceptable or dangerous to show. Since maintaining connection with caregivers is essential, the child adapts by reducing or hiding those emotions. This adaptation is not a deliberate decision but a biological response. The nervous system prioritizes attachment because attachment equals safety. When emotional expression threatens that attachment, the mind and body work together to suppress the expression in order to protect the relationship. A child who senses that anger leads to disapproval may stop showing anger. A child who notices that sadness is ignored may stop sharing their pain. A child who receives praise for being quiet and cooperative may begin to silence their own needs. Over time, these adjustments become deeply ingrained patterns. The child learns to monitor the emotional reactions of others and respond accordingly. They may become extremely attentive to the needs and moods of the people around them. This heightened awareness can create the appearance of maturity and responsibility at a young age. Adults may describe such children as well-behaved, considerate, or easy to manage. What often goes unnoticed is that this behavior may not come from inner security, but from an unconscious effort to maintain emotional safety. Emotional suppression does not mean the feelings disappear. The emotions continue to exist within the child as internal world, but they are no longer expressed openly. Instead, the child's nervous system stores the tension created by unexpressed feelings. Anger may turn inward, becoming self-criticism. Fear may transform into constant vigilance. Sadness may settle into a quiet sense of loneliness that the child cannot easily explain. As these patterns continue through childhood and adolescence, they begin to shape a person, a sense of identity. The individual may grow up believing that their value depends on meeting the expectations of others. They may feel uncomfortable expressing disagreement or asserting their needs. Their attention becomes directed outward, focusing on maintaining harmony rather than exploring their own emotional landscape. This conditioning can also affect how people interpret their own emotions. When feelings have been suppressed for many years, individuals may lose familiarity with their internal signals. They might struggle to identify what they truly feel in challenging situations. Instead of recognizing anger when boundaries are crossed, they may experience confusion or guilt. Instead of acknowledging sadness, they may distract themselves with activity or responsibility. The body, however, continues to register every emotional experience. The brain and the immune system are closely connected, and the nervous system responds to emotional suppression in complex ways. When feelings are repeatedly pushed aside, the stress response within the body may remain active for long periods. Muscles remain tense, breathing patterns become shallow, and stress hormones circulate more frequently than necessary. Many people who learned early in life to suppress their emotions become highly capable adults. They are often reliable, disciplined, and attentive to the needs of others. They may succeed professionally and appear stable from the outside. Yet internally they may experience chronic tension, fatigue, or anxiety without fully understanding why these sensations persist. Part of the difficulty lies in the fact that the patterns were learned so early that they feel normal. A person who has spent decades prioritizing others' comfort over their own emotional truth may not immediately recognize the imbalance. They may assume that self-sacrifice is simply part of being responsible or compassionate. They may even feel proud of their ability to endure stress without complaining. At the same time, suppressed emotions can influence relationships in subtle ways. When people are disconnected from their own feelings, communication becomes less authentic. They may avoid conversations that involve conflict or vulnerability. Important needs remain unspoken, and misunderstandings accumulate quietly over time. Relationships may appear stable on the surface while lacking genuine emotional depth. The remarkable capacity of the human mind to adapt during childhood ensures survival within imperfect environments. Emotional suppression often begins as a creative strategy that allows a child to maintain connection and safety. It protects the child in moments when expressing the full truth might lead to rejection or punishment. The adaptation serves its purpose in those early years, when choices are limited and dependence on caregivers is unavoidable. As adulthood arrives, the same strategies can continue operating long after the original circumstances have changed. The nervous system still reacts according to patterns learned decades earlier. Situations that involve disagreement, disappointment, or emotional intensity may trigger the same internal response, minimize the feeling, maintain harmony, and avoid anything that might disrupt connection. The person may continue navigating life with a quiet habit of silencing parts of their inner experience, carrying forward the conditioning that began in childhood, while the unexpressed emotions remain stored within the mind and body, waiting to be acknowledged and understood. Human beings often think of the mind and body as two separate systems, as if thoughts and emotions belong to one realm while physical health belongs to another. In everyday language, people say things like, "It is all in your head," or "it is just stress," as if emotional experiences have little to do with the condition of the body. Yet biology tells a very different story. The human organism is not divided into isolated compartments. The brain, the nervous system, the immune system, and every organ in the body are constantly communicating with one another, forming a deeply interconnected network where emotional experiences and physical processes influence each other continuously. From the moment a person encounters a stressful situation, the body begins responding automatically. The brain perceives a threat, whether that threat is physical or emotional, and signals the nervous system to activate the stress response. Hormones such as adrenaline and cortisol are released into the bloodstream, preparing the body to react quickly. Heart rate increases, muscles tighten, breathing becomes faster, and attention narrows toward the perceived danger. This response is an extraordinary survival mechanism designed to protect human beings in moments of genuine threat. In short bursts, the stress response is highly beneficial. If a person needs to escape danger, respond to an emergency, or perform under pressure, the body's ability to mobilize energy rapidly can save lives. Once the situation passes, the nervous system is meant to return to a state of balance. Hormone levels decrease, muscles relax, breathing slows, and the body shifts into recovery mode. The difficulty arises when stress becomes chronic rather than temporary. Emotional experiences such as unresolved conflict, suppressed anger, fear of rejection, or the constant pressure to meet expectations can activate the same biological systems that respond to physical danger. The body does not distinguish clearly between a predator in the environment and an emotional threat to security or belonging. If a person repeatedly experiences situations where their feelings are suppressed or their needs are ignored, the stress response may remain active for extended periods of time. When the body remains in this heightened state of alertness, its internal systems begin to shift in subtle but powerful ways. The immune system, which normally protects the body from illness, may become weakened or dysregulated. Digestive processes can slow down or become irregular because energy is being redirected towards survival functions. Muscles remain tense, contributing to chronic pain or discomfort. Sleep patterns may become disrupted as the nervous system struggles to move from alertness into rest. Emotions that are not expressed or processed often contribute to this ongoing activation of the stress response. Anger that is continually suppressed does not simply vanish. The physiological energy associated with that emotion remains within the body. The same is true for fear, grief, and frustration. When these emotions are acknowledged and expressed in healthy ways, the body is able to move through them and eventually return to balance. when they are repeatedly ignored or denied. The body carries the tension created by those unresolved experiences. Many individuals who struggle with chronic stress or illness are not consciously aware of the emotional pressures influencing their health. They may describe themselves as responsible, hardworking, or deeply committed to caring for others. They may pride themselves on their ability to remain calm and composed even in difficult circumstances. Yet maintaining that composure sometimes requires the continuous suppression of emotional reactions that feel unacceptable or unsafe to express. The body registers these suppressed reactions through changes in the nervous system. The autonomic nervous system, which regulates involuntary bodily functions, constantly shifts between states of activation and relaxation. When a person experiences ongoing emotional strain, the balance between these states can become disrupted. The body may remain partially locked in a stress response, even when there is no immediate danger present. Over time, this imbalance places strain on multiple biological systems. The immune system may become less efficient at responding to infections. Inflammatory processes may increase within the body. Hormonal regulation can shift in ways that affect mood, energy levels, and metabolism. These changes do not occur instantly but develop gradually as the body attempts to cope with prolonged internal pressure. The mind-body connection also influences how people interpret physical symptoms. When individuals have spent many years focusing primarily on the needs of others or ignoring their own emotional signals, they may overlook the early signs of stress within their bodies. Fatigue, headaches, digestive discomfort, or persistent tension may be dismissed as minor inconveniences rather than meaningful messages from the body. As regulatory systems, in many cases the body communicates long before a person consciously recognizes the emotional conditions contributing to stress. Physical symptoms can emerge as signals that something within the individual's life requires attention. These signals are not punishments or signs of weakness. They are attempts by the body to restore balance and encourage awareness of internal experiences that may have been neglected. Modern scientific research continues to explore the ways psychological experiences influence biological processes. Studies in fields such as psychoneuroimmunology examine how emotions, thoughts, and social relationships interact with the nervous and immune systems. These investigations consistently reveal that emotional well-being and physical health cannot be separated into independent categories. When people begin paying attention to their emotional lives with greater honesty, the body often responds in noticeable ways. Recognizing feelings that have long been suppressed can reduce the burden placed on the stress response system. Learning to express boundaries, acknowledge anger, or process grief can gradually shift the nervous system toward a more balanced state. The body's capacity for healing is closely connected to the mind, ability to acknowledge and integrate emotional experience. Understanding the connection between mind and body invites a different perspective on health. Instead of viewing symptoms solely as mechanical problems within isolated organs, health becomes a reflection of the entire human experience. Emotional patterns, relationships, beliefs, and life circumstances all interact with biological systems in ways that shape the body as overall condition. Within this integrated view, every feeling, thought, and experience becomes part of the ongoing dialogue between the mind and the body, a dialogue that continues throughout a person. As life as each emotional experience leaves subtle biological traces within the living system. Kindness is often seen as one of the most admirable qualities a person can possess. From childhood onward, people are encouraged to be generous, patient, forgiving, and helpful toward others. These values help create cooperation and compassion within families and communities. Yet, there is a subtle boundary that is rarely discussed, a point where kindness gradually stops being a healthy expression of care and begins turning into something very different. When the desire to care for others consistently overrides the ability to care for oneself, kindness can slowly transform into self-abandonment. Many people who fall into this pattern do not recognize it immediately because their behavior is widely praised. They are described as thoughtful, dependable, and considerate. They are the ones who listen patiently when others are struggling, who volunteer to help when someone needs support, who rarely create conflict or ask for special treatment. Their presence is often comforting to others because they seem calm and accommodating in almost every situation. Yet beneath this image of kindness, there can be a quiet process unfolding, a gradual loss of connection with their own feelings and needs. This pattern often begins in early life when a child discovers that being agreeable helps maintain emotional safety. If a child grows up in an environment where conflict feels threatening or where caregivers are emotionally overwhelmed, the child may begin to focus on keeping the atmosphere peaceful. They might learn to anticipate the needs of adults around them and respond quickly before tension arises. Over time, the child becomes skilled at adjusting their behavior to avoid disappointment or disapproval. As this adaptation continues, the child may begin to disconnect from their own emotional signals. Feelings such as anger, frustration, or disappointment may feel risky to express because they could disrupt harmony. The safest path becomes accommodation. The child learns to smooth over disagreements, to take responsibility for the feelings of others, and to maintain an appearance of calm, even when something inside them feels unsettled. These habits often follow the person into adulthood. The individual becomes someone who consistently puts others first. They may say yes to requests even when they are already exhausted. They may tolerate unfair treatment in order to avoid confrontation. They may silence their own opinions in conversations where disagreement might occur. Each time they do this, they send a quiet message to themselves that their own needs are less important than maintaining peace. At first, these choices may feel like acts of generosity. Helping others and maintaining harmony can create a sense of purpose and belonging, yet over time the emotional cost begins to accumulate. When a person repeatedly ignores their own needs, a subtle internal tension develops. The mind may justify the behavior by telling itself that kindness requires sacrifice, but the body often experiences something different: fatigue, frustration, and emotional depletion. One of the reasons this pattern persists is that many people confuse kindness with compliance. They believe that caring for others means always agreeing, always helping, and never expressing discomfort. In reality, genuine kindness is rooted in authenticity. It comes from a place where a person recognizes both their own humanity and the humanity of others. When authenticity disappears and accommodation becomes automatic, kindness loses its balance. A person who has fallen into self-abandonment may struggle to recognize their own limits because they are so accustomed to prioritizing others. They may overlook the signals their body sends when they are overwhelmed. They might continue working when they are exhausted, continue listening when they feel emotionally drained, or continue giving even when resentment quietly begins to form beneath the surface. Resentment is often one of the first signs that kindness has crossed into self-neglect. It appears when the person's internal experience no longer matches their outward behavior. They may continue smiling and offering support, while internally feeling unappreciated or invisible. This contradiction can create confusion because the individual may believe they are supposed to feel fulfilled by helping others. When they instead feel drained or frustrated, they may blame themselves rather than recognizing the imbalance in their behavior. Another consequence of self-abandonment is the gradual weakening of personal boundaries. Boundaries are the psychological and emotional limits that help individuals protect their well-being and maintain a sense of identity. When someone consistently ignores these limits to accommodate others, the boundaries become unclear not only to themselves but also to the people around them. Others may begin to expect endless availability because they have rarely seen the person say no. In relationships, this dynamic can create hidden tension. The person who constantly gives may feel that others are taking advantage of them, while the people receiving the support may simply believe that everything is fine because no objections have been expressed. Communication becomes limited because the individual who feels overwhelmed has difficulty revealing their true feelings. The body often carries the emotional consequences of this ongoing imbalance. When a person continually suppresses their needs and emotions, the stress response within the nervous system may remain activated. The effort required to maintain composure, meet expectations, and avoid conflict can place a heavy burden on both mental and physical health. What appears externally as kindness may internally involve a constant state of tension. Recognizing the difference between healthy kindness and self-abandonment requires a shift in awareness. Compassion for others does not require the disappearance of the self. Genuine care includes the ability to acknowledge personal limits, express honest emotions, and protect one's own well-being. When people begin to notice how often they ignore their internal signals, they may start rediscovering parts of themselves that have remained quiet for many years. This process involves reconnecting with emotions that were previously dismissed or suppressed. Feelings of anger may reveal where boundaries have been crossed. Feelings of exhaustion may indicate that too much responsibility has been accepted without adequate rest. Feelings of sadness may point toward unmet needs that have remained unspoken for a long time. Kindness, in its healthiest form, flows from a place where a person remains connected to their own inner experience while extending care to others. When the self is acknowledged rather than ignored, relationships become more balanced and authentic. The individual is no longer acting solely out of obligation or fear of conflict, but from a genuine desire to support others while remaining rooted in their own emotional reality, a reality that includes personal needs, limits, and feelings that deserve recognition just as much as the needs and feelings of anyone else within the shared human experience. Many of the emotional patterns that shape a person as life operate quietly beneath the surface of awareness. People move through their daily routines, responding to situations, meeting responsibilities, and maintaining relationships without always recognizing the deeper forces guiding their behavior. Habits formed in childhood, emotional defenses developed for protection, and beliefs about personal worth often become so familiar that they feel like permanent parts of identity. A person may spend years living according to these patterns without ever questioning where they came from or whether they still serve a healthy purpose. Awareness begins when an individual pauses long enough to observe their inner world with honesty. This does not require dramatic life events or sudden revelations. Often it begins with small moments of noticing. A person may recognize how uncomfortable it feels to say no to a request, even when they are exhausted. They may notice tension in their body during conversations where they suppress disagreement. They may sense a quiet sadness or frustration that appears repeatedly in certain situations. These observations open a doorway into understanding how long-standing emotional patterns continue to influence present experiences. The challenge with awareness is that many people instinctively respond to self-observation with judgment. When individuals begin to notice habits such as people-pleasing, emotional suppression, or difficulty setting boundaries, they may criticize themselves for these behaviors. Thoughts such as "I should be stronger," or "I shouldn't feel this way," can arise quickly. This reaction is understandable because many cultures emphasize self-discipline, personal responsibility, often overlooking the deeper origins of emotional patterns. Yet judgment rarely creates meaningful change. When a person attacks themselves for the ways they have adapted to life challenges, the mind often becomes defensive. The behaviors that once provided protection become even more deeply embedded because the individual feels threatened by their own criticism. In contrast, compassion allows the process of awareness to unfold without creating additional emotional conflict. Compassion in this context does not mean excusing harmful behavior or avoiding responsibility. It involves recognizing that many of the patterns people struggle with today were originally developed as strategies for survival and connection. A child who learned to suppress anger may have done so to avoid punishment or rejection. A child who became overly responsible for others. Feelings may have done so to maintain emotional closeness with caregivers who were struggling themselves. These responses were not signs of weakness but expressions of intelligence within the limited choices available at the time. When individuals approach their past adaptations with compassion, they begin to see themselves differently. Instead of viewing their behaviors as personal flaws, they start to recognize them as responses to earlier circumstances. This shift in perspective softens the harsh inner voice that often accompanies self-examination. The person becomes more willing to explore their experiences honestly because the process no longer feels like an attack on their character. Awareness also invites people to reconnect with emotions that have been suppressed for long periods. Many individuals have spent years ignoring certain feelings because they believed those emotions were unacceptable or dangerous to express. Anger, grief, fear, and disappointment may have been pushed aside in order to maintain harmony with others. When awareness grows, these emotions may begin to surface again, sometimes with surprising intensity. Compassion becomes essential during these moments because strong emotions can feel overwhelming if they have been hidden for many years. Instead of trying to push them away again, a compassionate approach encourages curiosity. The individual begins asking gentle questions about their own experience. What is this feeling trying to communicate? When did I first begin reacting this way? What needs or boundaries might have been ignored in the past? This kind of inquiry does not demand immediate solutions. It simply creates space for understanding. Over time, the act of acknowledging emotions without judgment allows the nervous system to relax. Feelings that once seemed threatening become easier to tolerate because the person is no longer resisting them. Emotional awareness gradually replaces automatic reactions. Another aspect of compassion involves recognizing the shared nature of human struggle. Many people believe they are alone in their difficulties, especially when those difficulties involve internal conflicts such as self-doubt or suppressed emotions. In reality, countless individuals carry similar patterns formed through early experiences of adaptation. Realizing that these struggles are part of the broader human condition can reduce feelings of isolation and shame. Compassion also extends beyond the self, to include the people who influenced early emotional development. Understanding that caregivers and authority figures were shaped by their own histories can create a broader perspective on past experiences. This does not mean denying harm or minimizing painful memories. It means acknowledging that the behaviors of others often emerge from their own unresolved struggles. Through this lens, awareness becomes less about assigning blame and more about understanding the complex web of influences that shape human behavior. Each person is affected by family dynamics, cultural expectations, emotional environments, and biological sensitivities. Recognizing these influences can transform how individuals interpret their past and how they respond to challenges in the present. As awareness and compassion deepen, people often begin noticing subtle shifts in their daily lives. Situations that once triggered automatic reactions may start to feel different. The individual may pause before agreeing to something that feels overwhelming. They may notice emotions arising earlier and respond with curiosity rather than avoidance. Small moments of honesty begin replacing long-standing habits of suppression. This gradual process does not erase old patterns instantly. Habits developed over many years rarely disappear quickly. However, awareness changes the relationship a person has with those patterns. Instead of being controlled by unconscious reactions, the individual begins observing them as they occur. Each moment of observation creates an opportunity to respond differently. Compassion supports this process by allowing progress to unfold naturally rather than forcing change through pressure or self-criticism. The person learns to recognize setbacks without interpreting them as failures. They understand that growth involves patience, reflection, and repeated practice in listening to their own inner experience. Within this environment of awareness and compassion, emotional healing becomes possible because the individual is no longer fighting against their own mind. The same sensitivity that once led to suppression and self-neglect can gradually become a source of insight and emotional wisdom, guiding the person toward a deeper understanding of their experiences, while the ongoing dialogue between awareness and compassion continues shaping the way they relate to themselves and the world around them. Many people grow up believing that kindness means always being available, always agreeing, and always putting the needs of others ahead of their own. They are taught that a good person avoids conflict, keeps the peace, and does whatever is necessary to make others comfortable. While these beliefs may appear compassionate on the surface, they can quietly distort the meaning of genuine kindness. When kindness is defined only as endless accommodation, people often lose touch with an equally important truth. Real kindness includes honesty, respect, and the ability to recognize personal limits. Human beings are not designed to live without boundaries. Every healthy system in nature has some form of boundary that allows it to maintain balance. The skin protects the body while still allowing contact with the world. Cells have membranes that regulate what enters and what leaves. In the same way, emotional and psychological boundaries help individuals maintain a sense of identity while remaining connected to others. Boundaries are not barriers meant to push people away. They are structures that preserve well-being and create the conditions for genuine relationships. When a person grows up in an environment where their needs or emotions were frequently dismissed, they may learn to ignore their internal signals in order to maintain connection. Saying no might have led to disapproval. Expressing anger might have been seen as disrespectful. Requesting personal space might have been interpreted as selfish. Over time, the individual may conclude that protecting their own limits threatens relationships, and they begin prioritizing harmony above everything else. As these habits continue into adulthood, the person may become known for their generosity and willingness to help. Friends, coworkers, and family members might rely on them because they rarely refuse a request. They become the dependable one, the person who solves problems and absorbs tension so that others can feel at ease. On the surface, this role appears admirable, yet beneath it there is often an invisible struggle taking place. Without boundaries, kindness can slowly transform into obligation. The individual may start agreeing to things not because they genuinely want to help, but because they feel unable to decline. Each yes becomes automatic, even when exhaustion or frustration begins building internally. The person may continue smiling and cooperating while quietly feeling overwhelmed by responsibilities that exceed their emotional or physical capacity. This imbalance often leads to a subtle form of resentment. The individual might begin feeling that others expect too much from them or fail to appreciate their efforts. Yet expressing these feelings can feel uncomfortable because the identity of being the kind one has been reinforced for so long. Admitting limits may seem like a betrayal of the role they have always played. Healthy boundaries introduce a different understanding of kindness. Instead of viewing kindness as self-sacrifice, boundaries recognize that caring relationships require mutual respect. When a person acknowledges their limits honestly, they allow others to see them more clearly as a human being rather than as an endless source of support. This honesty creates the possibility of more balanced interactions where responsibility and care are shared rather than carried by one individual alone. Establishing boundaries begins with paying attention to internal signals that have often been ignored. Feelings of tension, fatigue, or discomfort frequently indicate that a limit is being approached. These sensations are not obstacles to kindness, but valuable information from the nervous system. They help a person recognize when they are giving from a place of genuine willingness, and when they are giving from pressure or fear of disappointing others. Many people feel anxious when they first attempt to set boundaries because they anticipate negative reactions. They may imagine that others will become angry, withdraw affection, or question their character. These fears often reflect earlier experiences where expressing limits did lead to rejection or criticism. The nervous system remembers those moments and tries to avoid repeating them by maintaining the old pattern of compliance. Yet boundaries do not need to be expressed with hostility or defensiveness. They can be communicated calmly and respectfully, focusing on personal capacity rather than blaming others. A person might acknowledge their desire to help while also explaining that they need rest or time for other responsibilities. In this way, the boundary becomes a statement of honesty rather than an act of confrontation. Healthy boundaries also protect the quality of kindness itself. When people give more than they can sustain, their generosity eventually becomes strained. The support they offer may start to feel mechanical rather than heartfelt. By respecting their own limits, individuals ensure that the care they extend to others remains authentic and freely chosen rather than driven by obligation. Another important aspect of boundaries is that they encourage personal responsibility within relationships. When one person continually absorbs the needs and problems of others, those individuals may never develop the opportunity to address their own challenges directly. Boundaries gently shift this dynamic by allowing each person to participate in the work of maintaining emotional balance within the relationship. Boundaries also help individuals remain connected to their own identity. When someone consistently prioritizes the expectations of others, their sense of self can become blurred. Personal interests, values, and desires may gradually fade from awareness because so much attention is directed outward. Setting limits restores the space necessary for self-reflection and personal growth. Through this process, kindness becomes something more grounded and sustainable. It is no longer defined by constant availability or endless accommodation, but by the ability to show care while remaining honest about one's own experience. The individual learns that relationships do not collapse simply because they express limits. In many cases, connections actually become stronger because communication becomes more genuine. The practice of maintaining healthy boundaries does not eliminate compassion. Instead, it deepens it by ensuring that care flows in both directions. The person who respects their own needs becomes better able to recognize the needs of others without losing themselves in the process. Their support becomes clearer, more balanced, and more sincere because it arises from choice rather than compulsion. As people begin integrating boundaries into their relationships, they may notice that their energy and emotional clarity gradually return. Situations that once created silent resentment become opportunities for honest conversation. Interactions with others begin to reflect a more authentic version of who they are rather than the carefully controlled version that existed when personal limits were constantly ignored. While kindness continues to exist, not as self-denial, but as a balanced expression of care that honors both the well-being of others and the integrity of the self within every interaction and decision.